Carolyn V. Hamilton, and today I'm very excited to chat with Mary Dyer, who's the author of her new memoir, Dyer Straits, all those years ago in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Mary's a native of Dorchester, which is a working class neighborhood in Boston. And she was born in the 60s, the youngest child of eight. And currently, she's a wife and a mom to a big rescue dog. And I want to learn more about how she came to write Dyer Straits. So, welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much. It's
So,
good to be here.
what first compelled you to turn these experiences growing up in Dorchester into which is such a different neighborhood from the Scandinavian fishing village neighborhood I grew up in? But what compelled you to do this, and how did you know you were ready to tell that story?
What compelled me to do it? Interesting question because years and years of growing up and talking about our childhood with my father, who was quite violent and mentally ill. We have all these crazy stories in my family that friends have heard through years. They're all like, "Oh, crazy Dickie Dyer." Like they knew my father. If they didn't know him personally, they kind of knew of him. And all of our lives, people have said to myself and my siblings, somebody needs to write a book about your crazy family. Not that we're crazy, but the crazy things that happened, with my father and then just with us growing up. And we've heard this our whole lives. And I said, I think it's time that I take someone on and do this and actually tell this story about this big family that overcame a lot of adversity, both at home and in the community. I mean, it might as well be me because I think it's a great story to tell.
The time was also an interesting time. You mentioned things going on in your community, and I really, really, because I'm of a certain age, and I really resonated with the things you talked about with civil rights and integration into your high schools and things like that, which I didn't experience on the West Coast. Yet I know that nationwide there was so much going on politically. And you have really done a great job of weaving those outside influences into your family as well. So, how did you decide which memories to include and which ones to leave out? And especially with dealing with such emotionally charged moments.
Well, my focus in doing this story about my family was also partially motivated by highlighting Dorchester, by making this a true Dorchester story, so that on a local level, people could relate to this from the times of the 60s and the 70s when a lot was going on, as you said. So I really had to weigh out, do I want this to be local but have a broad appeal, which I did. I wanted local people to be able to relate to it, but also if somebody, like you said, in California or in Idaho for that matter, grew up with kind of a similar upbringing, my hope is to bring some relatability no matter where you grew up. In terms of deciding what to keep, I decided to not just make it about my family, but like I said, about Dorchester. So I said, I think I'm going to incorporate some geographical landmarks. And in doing that, mentioning things like streets, stores that no longer exist, parks that we all played at. So to keep those, I had to weed out a lot of superfluous information, like maybe every little minute detail about an event in my family wasn't as important, but let's talk a little bit about where we hung out, what parks we played at. So I weeded out based on trying to appeal more broadly and not making it just about my family, but also about Dorchester.
I think you did a terrific job. Can you walk us through this writing process? I mean, did you follow a structured plan, or did this story just evolve as you wrote? In fiction, we have what we call pantsers and plotters, people who plot out the outline, and then people who just write by the seat of their pants. How did that go
Yeah.
for you, that writing process?
Well, so I've been working on the book for 3 years, which finally I just published about a month ago. It took on a different structure. In the beginning, it was kind of more of a chronological, like I started it the way most people would start a beginning, middle, and end, right? A timeline. It had a chronological structure. But I would say halfway through, I'd say at the like year and a half mark, I was working with an author and she said, wouldn't it be cool if it could do it more like a movie? So a movie flip, like where it flip flops between a memory from, say, childhood, but then bringing it back to the present and going a little bit like that. So the structure changed quite a bit. So it went from beginning, middle, and end to more like my siblings and I just buried my father and we're sitting around talking about the crazy stories. And then we go into memories and now we're in childhood. So, oh, remember the time when dad did this crazy thing? And then now we're in childhood, but then we're back in the living room as adults. Oh, yeah, that was really crazy. And then having like each other chiming in on their own little recollections of that memory. So it changed. The structure definitely changed halfway through.
The movie analogy is really good because I've talked about this before, where if you think of your story as a movie, and so many movies, they'll start with this big action scene. And of course, your memoir isn't going to start necessarily with a car chase, but it'll start with this big scene. And then maybe there will be a flash sign on the screen that says 6 months earlier, or 24
Right.
hours earlier, and then it'll tell the backstory that set up to that scene. And then the second half or the last 2/3 of the movie will be, and what happened after that. So
Yes.
that's what I call the movie structure. And I think it works really well in memoir because the whole idea that you've figured out is hook the reader first, hook them into your story. Why should they care? Then feed them the other stories and information. Can you walk us through your writing process? Like, did you write every day? Did you set up a schedule, a writing schedule for yourself to force yourself to write and make this happen?
Initially, I was working full time. Right now, I'm retired. But when I first started the book 3 years ago, because I was working full time, I was doing this after hours, in the evening, weekends. So I really didn't have like a schedule. It was more, when can I fit it in? And you and I were working together in those early days, doing coaching calls and things like that. And really, it was just about where can I find some time to plug in content? So I decided to retire about a year and a half ago with the intention of finishing this book and really making it a full-time job. And that is what I did. I decided to make the writing and publishing of my book a full-time job, and I retired, and it became, I would say, a 40 to 45-hour job where I did have a structured day around, I would do my morning routine, have my coffee, do my exercises, walk the dog. And then it was literally on my laptop all day, except to break for lunch. I made it that full-time job.
And did you tell your family and friends that you were doing this so that, I mean, people, I'm sure, now thought, oh, she's retired, she can come to lunch, she can volunteer with this organization. Did you have things like that happen that you had to make a choice between, do I do this or do I write?
No, I mean, because I didn't want to just be sitting here all day long and having no fun. I mean, being retired, it was important for me to dedicate time for the book, but I also balanced it out with going out, meeting people, having lunch with a couple of girlfriends who also retired or who were getting close to retirement. So I didn't tether myself like, oh, I got to do this and I can't do anything else. I kind of just made time for everything. And I said, I think this will get published in a good amount of time, whether or not I have a little fun in between. So I did balance it out. And by the way, there was nobody holding a gun to my head saying, you have to have this done. I was setting my own timeline, so I had the flexibility.
Right. And that's one of the things, especially when we come from a working environment where there's a deadline. This has to be done by Friday. This has to be done in the next 3 months. There are
Right.
always these deadlines. And so when we sit down to write our book, we don't really have a deadline. Nobody's forcing us to do it. So it does, I think, involve a kind of inner emotional realignment as far as deadlines go. I'm wondering, what challenges did you face in balancing honesty with sensitivity toward the real people that you're writing about in your life, and how did you navigate that?
My memoir took on a different trajectory because initially I had been using alias names for all of my siblings and every person mentioned in the book, except for my father. Interesting. In order to be sensitive, that is what I did. I said, I'm just going to keep this as alias names. Everybody had a name that was similar to their name, but like my sister was Maggie at the time. Her name is Marge. My brother Danny was Davy. Interesting, again, how things change. My family was together for Christmas this past year. And I was thinking I was getting pretty close to publishing, and the topic came up about the book. And all of a sudden, we all decided, well, maybe we should use our real names. So that changed because initially I was trying to be sensitive about
Of
that.
course.
But then everybody agreed that they actually wouldn't mind if I used their real names. And I said, wow, then if I'm going to use your real names, do you mind if I put your picture in the book too? Because it would be great if readers could see and put the face with the name. And so that morphed. And now in the middle of the book, there's a whole section of photographs of my siblings and my parents. And the only sensitivity issues that I had left to deal with, which existed from the start, was making sure I was sensitive about the content. There are some tragedies in the book, and I had to really make sure that I didn't like over dramatize some of this stuff because there's a lot of graphic violence in my book. Stuff that happened with my father out in the community. There's one chapter about a little boy who died. My brother was a little kid when this happened and he was with him. He witnessed it. So I had to really be sensitive about how I explained that because that little boy may have family still alive. Like, I don't want to say anything that would upset living relatives around this because
Right.
it's very tragic for a child to die.
And best way I always advise writers to address that is to be factual, stick to the facts, and then focus on your reaction to what happened.
And I wasn't there on a lot of these events. A lot of these, most of them are secondhand stories. So I couldn't put myself there. I wasn't there when most of,
You were able to, they knew you were writing this book, and so I
right,
imagine you were able to write about what they told you they felt.
correct, because it was like literally an interview where I sat my siblings down and I said, tell me all the things that would be good to include. I had to put myself in their head based on what they told me. And on
That's all you
dialogue,
can do.
right, dialogue that I know happened, but I had to kind of find a way. I had to really like find a way to be a little bit more sensitive than what actually did happen in some cases. I had to make it so that the reader, I don't want my reader to put the book down and say, this is too violent.
Yeah.
This is too much doom and gloom. This is too much blood. I mean, I had to be sensitive. I don't want my readers to be grossed out. You know what I mean? I had to balance that.
What a challenge.
It really was.
So, did you let your siblings read parts of the books, part of the parts before you published?
Yes. In fact, before I published, I gave all of them a copy of the manuscript or an actual proof of the paperback. I said, look at it. If you can if you can read it, do whatever you want. Read it, skim it. But I gave them like a timeline. Like, if you could get it done within a month because I don't want this going like too long because I really
Right.
want to publish.
Right.
But I gave them all full disclosure. I said, look at anything that feels like it's too grossly inaccurate, or if I've misrepresented what you told me in any way, or if I've like gotten it completely wrong, you got to let me know because I don't want this. I don't want people in my family feeling like this is like half baked. And I also had to tell them it's also loosely based. It's not every single thing is like black and white. These we're talking 50, in some cases 60 years of memories that can get faded over time.
Right.
So I had to let them read it, but also let them know like this, I'm going to do the best I can to synthesize everything you told me the
Yeah.
best way possible.
Well, it sounds like you had a really, really positive experience with your family, which is a good thing. Not everybody gets to have that. Uh,
Yeah.
so for someone who's just beginning a memoir and maybe they're concerned about how their family is going to react, I often tell people if you're really, really, really paranoid or probably with good reason, just change everybody's name, including your own, and publish under a pen name and don't tell anybody you're writing a book. Because if they don't know you're writing a book, they can't react and nobody's going to know the pen name. Readers aren't going to know if it's your real name or not anyway. So, what advice would you give to somebody who's starting out and a little concerned about what their family might think?
I struggled with that whole, like I said earlier, the alias names, and me using, a pseudonym for this. I think everybody has a different family relationship. I don't know what people's relationship is with the people that they're talking about. From my memoir, the best advice I could take for myself was I needed to make sure I was at peace. I needed to be at peace with my siblings because the most important thing, yes, it's great to have a book, a memoir that's going to be successful, but not at the cost of losing my relationship with my family. That has always been primary for me. So, my advice would be if you value your relationship with your family or whomever you're talking about, you got to do what you think is going to be, you got to be able to sleep at night. I had to say I can't do this knowing I haven't run it by them. If you don't feel like you'll get support from the people that are in the book, my next question would be, is there any chance you could have any legal problems? And if you can't, then I guess go ahead and do it. I consulted with an attorney, Carolyn, the one that you referred me to way back in the beginning. I got a literary attorney to help me. And I think that's the best advice I would give anybody. Talk to somebody who knows the legal ramifications, because I think that we all can be very unsure. Is it okay to say this, even if it's a fake name? Is it
Well, we're
not
not
okay?
lawyers. We're
Right.
not lawyers, so what do we know?
And I consulted with this attorney at least 4 times in the 3 years just to say, hey, my brother got shot. There's an event in my book. This is a true story. I don't know how much I can talk about this because it's it involves other people. It's not just my brother. And I got advice that was solid. And he said, if it's public record, there's nothing anybody can say.
Right.
But
Again, sticking to
I
the
needed to
facts.
hear it. And I needed to hear
Yes.
that from him. Because if I just make that assumption on my own,
Yes.
I don't think I ever would have been able to sleep at night just wondering, like, oh my God, is someone gonna be able to sue me because I mentioned that my brother got shot? And so I would get advice legally. If you can afford it, I would do it.
I think it's a sound investment. It didn't I think Cameron Powell does his first initial talk for free. And So I really think that's a good idea. And I've consulted with a literary attorney in the past 20 years ago, and it was the best hour I spent because it really did give me the confidence to go forward and not have that worry distracting
Right.
from my writing and my storytelling.
And I will say, through the 3 years of writing, I constantly kept rewriting and rewriting because I just wasn't sure what I could and couldn't say. And Cameron is the person who I reached out to several times. I'll give you another example and then we can move on. My memoir has a very distinct Beatles thread through the book, meaning the Beatles are a huge part of my family's story, right? We
Yeah.
grew up with a lot of music. I made the decision because of how much I love the Beatles. Every single chapter, there's 58 chapters, every chapter has a Beatles reference in the title. And throughout every chapter, I have what I call little breadcrumbs, little references and hints that kind of like tell the landscape, the emotional landscape of the story using a Beatles reference. This is again where I needed to consult with Cameron. And I said, I need to know how much can I do this? Or am I going, is the record company or anybody going to come after me because I've got all these Beatles references? I had to ask, and it was a good hour, like you said, of time well spent, where he told me, actually, a lot of this falls under fair use. Titles are okay to use, I didn't know. So
Yeah.
copyright issues, I had to know.
Well, that's very insightful, and thank you for sharing that. What would you say to an aspiring memoir writer who worries that their story just isn't important enough?
I think everybody has a story that's important enough to write about. And if you don't, I do think from what I learned, as long as you have, everybody has a story, but can you tell it in a way that makes it unique? That's the key. That was, for me, it was doing the Beatles references because it wasn't just a story, it was also incorporating a theme. So for me, that was like a key piece of making my own unique mark with my book. So everybody has an important story, and I think everybody should write their story.
So,
My Mine was I had a hook, and it's just what I wanted to do.
so if you could give one piece of advice to memoir writers about staying committed to finishing their book, what would you say?
I would say don't let fear drive that decision. Because I have met people who, in the process of writing my book, they said, I actually started writing a book, been on it for 20 years, and it's kind of just, sitting on a thumb drive. And I say, well, how come you haven't finished it? Fear stops everybody. I'm afraid of what people will think. I would say this is the honest to God truth. This was the hardest thing I think I've ever done in my life, writing this book and overcoming the fear of putting it out there. But I have that feeling of like I crossed my T's, dotted my I's, did my due diligence. I would not let fear hold any. I would say, don't let fear stop you from putting out your story because it'll never get done. You need to just like decide, I'm going to do this
I agree.
and get mentors to help you overcome the hurdles that are going to pop up.
Great advice. Thank you. Is there anything else that, as we wrap this up, that you'd like to add about your journey or any self-doubts you had, or how do you, now that the book is done and it's out there, tell me how that feels for you.
It's at first I was actually, it's weird. I felt sad after I published. I was depressed for about a week because I couldn't get excited. I was too scared, like to even enjoy it. But now I am really excited and I booked some events, some book signings, and I think once you get your toe in the water and you start actually getting some promotion on your book, it starts to get exciting. So scared, then excited. It took about a week for it to all settle into my brain. And then I was like, oh, this is actually getting really good.
Great. Well, I've so enjoyed this visit, Mary, and I think what you have to say is going to be interesting to a lot of people. So
Good.
I'm looking forward to sharing that. And thank you again for answering my questions and being willing to be on camera and talk about your achievement.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the time. And if anybody is interested, my book is right over my shoulder. It's called Dyer Straits, and it's available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again, Mary.